Hello everyone, today we'll be talking about folding of the embryo. You can see this is a view of the embryo and we're basically looking at it um, from the dorsal aspect, which is why you can see over here you can see the ectoderm, you can see the neural plate, you can see the developing brain, you can see the cardiogenic mesoderm, and you can see the cut edge of the amnion because the amnion is kind of covering it like this. So what is the cardiogenic mesoderm? Right, it's basically mesoderm, which as always has originated from the ectoderm and which has spread in laterally towards the cranial side and is met in the middle to form a horseshoe shaped structure. And it is in the cardiogenic mesoderm that we have the formation of the heart tube and the formation of the pericardial cavity, right, which is basically formed by the embryonic cells of the cardiogenic mesoderm. Right, so we have a cross section like this, and that can be seen over here. So topmost, this part over here is the ectoderm part, but because of the nature of the cross section, there isn't any actual surface ectoderm. We just have the neuroectoderm, and this because we're looking at it cranially, this is the neural folds of the cranial part that have become really prominent because they're going to form the developing brain. Then you can see the notochord. You cannot see the mesoderm at this point underneath it because in the part that is immediately underneath the neuroectoderm, in the midline to be exact, we have the formation of the notochord. So there isn't any mesoderm at this point. The yellow is representative of the endoderm. What is this point over here? This is known as the oropharyngeal membrane, and it is the point where we have the fusion of the ectoderm and the endoderm, such that there isn't any mesoderm at this point, and that is the point till which the notochord develops because it cannot develop more, specifically because there isn't any space for it. Generally speaking, when we have the cardiogenic mesodermic cells coming in, they kind of surround it like this. So after the oropharyngeal membrane, you will see part of this is still intraembryonic mesoderm, right? It's just cranial to the oropharyngeal membrane, which is the point beyond which we cannot have growth of the notochord because there isn't any mesoderm that can come in between it. Over here we don't have any mesoderm, and we have the formation of this is the pericardial cavity, ventral, and we have the primordial heart dorsal. Now you should know this surface is a dorsal surface, and so the part of surface you cannot see will be the ventral. This is cranial, this is caudal, and let's assume this is right and this is left. So this part over here is dorsal, this part over here is ventral, this is cranial, and this is caudal. Because of the cross section that was taken, this over here is the neuroectoderm, right? This is the neuroectoderm. We have these somites over here, and these are the neural folds. And the neural folds cranially have become really thickened to form the developing brain. Oropharyngeal membrane, the point where the ectoderm and the endoderm are fused, so no mesoderm can come in between, and the notochord cannot elongate beyond this point. This is the cardiogenic mesoderm area, which is still intraembryonic but is beyond the oropharyngeal membrane. This is the amnion part, and the amnion is basically continuous with the surface ectoderm part of it. Generally it surrounds whole of it. It should be like surrounding this in this manner, and this is the endoderm of this yellow part. specifically is the endoderm of the umbilical vesicle. And what happens is that when folding occurs, folding is very important for the establishment of the body form of an embryo. As the developing brain elongates cranially, this is important. The developing brain is growing in the cranial direction, right? And this elongation supersedes that of the other parts. What happens is that, right, at this moment it's simply projecting dorsally into the amniotic cavity, but as it will continue to grow cranially in this direction, it will eventually overhang the developing heart. And why does this happen? Because of the cranial elongation of the developing brain, right? What happens is that it will exceed the oropharyngeal membrane, or it can be seen that it basically grows beyond the oropharyngeal membrane. So it will grow beyond it, and because of that, it will end up overhanging we will have this movement. We will have the forebrain overhanging the primordial heart. Something overhangs is kind of like this. Anyways, now we have a change. It's no longer dorsal. For one thing, we have a change in situation, and the septum transversum is now caudal to the primordial heart and the pericardial xylem, which is the way it is in the adult. All these structures are caudal to the developing brain, and on the ventral surface, which is again how it is, the septum transversum is caudal, which is how it is because it will become the central tenon of the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is basically what partitions the thoracic and the abdominal cavity. Also, because of this, over here we just had the umbilical vesicle. This was extraembryonic. Because of the head fold, part of the umbilical vesicle has become incorporated as the foregut, right? Which is basically what's going to form the esophagus and the pharynx and the lower respiratory system. Right now, the foregut, it's lying between the forebrain and the primordial heart, because we have the primordial heart over here, but we have the foregut in between the primordial heart and the forebrain, and that is exactly how it is, because foregut is going to make the esophagus, it's going to make the pharynx, it's going to make other stuff like the lower parts of the lower respiratory tract, right? Now we also have the oropharyngeal membrane, and it is separating the foregut from the stomodium, and the stomodium is a primordium of the mouth cavity. And the oropharyngeal membrane is separating the stomodium or the primordium of the mouth cavity from the foregut, because obviously more of it's the primordial mouth and not the mouth cavity, right? The orifice. Right now, the septum transversum is lying caudal to the heart. This is cranial, this is caudal. We have the septum transversum over here. Here it will subsequently develop into the central tenon of the diaphragm, which is the partition between the abdominal and the thoracic cavities. Right? Because of the head fold, the arrangement of the pericardial cavity has also been changed. Initially, you can see that the pericardial cavity is at a different location, but now it is both ventral to the heart and also cranial to the septum transversum, and eventually, as the heart tube will grow like this, it will invaginate into the pericardial xylem, and that is how it should be as part of development. So this is necessary that it will end up moving ventral to the primordial heart and cranial to the septum transversum located over here. Right, and at this stage we have wide communication between the intraembryonic xylem and the extraembryonic xylem. The extraembryonic and the intraembryonic xylem. As far as the intraembryonic xylem is concerned, it's the cavity between the two kinds of mesoderm, and it is within the part of the embryo. Extraembryonic is the one that is known as the chorionic cavity. I'll show this in another diagram. Anyways, to reiterate everything that I just said, this is our view. Basically has been cut in the same way, right? And this is how everything is moving. This is the forebrain. This is the foregut, right? Because of the head fold, part of the umbilical vesicle has become incorporated into the embryo and has formed the foregut. The foregut is between the developing brain, because you can see this is a developing brain, this is the primordial heart, the foregut is in between. We also have the oropharyngeal membrane in between the foregut and the stomodium, right? Initially, the oropharyngeal membrane, it was cranial to the developing brain, but because of the fact that the developing brain, it grew cranially very rapidly, it ended up exceeding the oropharyngeal membrane, and because of this, it also ended up overhanging the primordial heart, the septum transversum, the pericardial coelom, etc. And because of that, the developing brain was now cranial to these structures, whereas before it was caudal to them. Now these structures are also on the ventral surface, which is where they should be in the adult. As you can see initially, here we had the developing brain, and these structures were cranial to it, but now these structures are caudal to it. They're also now on the ventral surface of the embryo, and also at the end of it we have the pericardial coelom ventral to the heart, which is how it should be, and the septum transversum caudal to both these structures. Now if we go step by step in a way that you can easily reproduce it in an exam, you write the head fold, which is a part of folding in the median plane. It basically it forms because of growth of the developing brain, or you can say the growth of the developing forebrain. So basically the neural folds at the cranial end, and because their growth will exceed that of the oropharyngeal membrane, or more accurately, because the developing brain will grow beyond the oropharyngeal membrane, because of that it will end up overhanging the primordial heart, the pericardial coelom, and the septum transversum. You can see that because of this head fold, all these structures are now caudal to the developing brain, and they are also now on the ventral surface of the embryo, right? And also the pericardial coelom is now anterior to the primordial heart, which is how it should be for proper invagination to happen. And the septum transversum is cranial caudal to these structures, which is how it should be, since it will develop into diaphragm, which is the partition. Also, because of this head fold, part of the umbilical vesicle has become incorporated as the foregut, which will form the esophagus, the trachea, etc. But we have the oropharyngeal membrane separating this foregut from the stomodium, which is the primordium of the mouth. And also the foregut is in between the developing brain and the primordial heart, which is how it should be in the adult. So I'm hoping this makes sense.